Hello everyone, I'm Raj Changadoo. This is Property Investing 2.0, and my guest today is Luke Spikes. Luke is a multiple award winning property investor, and he has an entrepreneurial career that spans over 33 years and has built several successful startup businesses in the high tech and property space. These days, he's known for being the founder and CEO of Higgi Haus, and their mission is to deliver amazing places to stay for today's young professionals. I'm very pleased to have him on with us. Luke, hello and welcome. How are you?
Well, Raj, I'm very good. I'm exhausted after that introduction, though.
Yeah.
I hadn't appreciated I'd done quite so many startups over time. You forget over time. It's apparently like giving birth to children. My wife will tell me. You forget how painful it was. But I'll talk a little bit more about that as we progress.
Well, at least you're not forget. At least you're not forgetting how many children you have. I'm sure your wife definitely doesn't forget those births.
I'm not going to do
that. Luke, I've been really excited to have this sit down with you today, not only to get an insight into your property journey and the experiences that you've had, but also to look at property from a different perspective, almost a startup and brand approach. And that's something we'll dive into a little bit later. But for now, I think it's a good place to start with a bit more of an overview of your entrepreneurial background and some of the startups you have been involved in. So maybe you can go through that for us.
Happy to. And I think they're really, for me, important thing is I'm taking much of what I've learned to do elsewhere and I'm bringing it to the world of property. And I didn't realize that would necessarily mark us out as being different, because I was just doing what I had always done. And over 33 years, you hone your craft, don't you? I would describe myself as a fire starter. And just in case there's anyone from the fire service listening, I don't actually mean that in a literal sense. I fundamentally enjoy the whole process that surrounds identifying a problem that isn't being served or solved well, and coming up with a solution that someone's prepared to give you money to solve that problem for on their behalf. And then the whole creative process, because it is a creative process by its nature, of turning that thing into a tangible offering that then someone is happy and delighted to say, yes, here's my check. Thank you very much for the good or service you've created is one that excites me, thrills me. And I seemingly have gotten so practiced at it now, no one will let me do anything else, because I am on now number 7. And all of them are fundamentally similar in the sense that they started with a problem to solve and a customer to serve. There was nothing, and from nothing we created something. The first 6, though, were all technology businesses, and I found myself in the world of technology, sort of part by design, part by accident. If I go way back in the dim and distant past, my first degree was finance, but I always knew that I was destined to be treading an entrepreneurial path because my parents were entrepreneurs. So that's, if you're wondering sort of where these things have their origin, that's where in my case it has its origin. I grew up around entrepreneurs. I grew up around all of the challenges that presents, particularly if you're a child, trying to seek some form of attention from your parents, right? Which don't get, because the business is getting all the attention, and so it was an almost inevitable and quite logical progression for me to make. So my first business I actually started when I was 18 years of age. That one failed miserably, and I say that because often in English culture, you failed at something, whereas in American culture, actually, it's lauded, it's applauded. How can you possibly be pushing hard unless you failed at something? But what it was a very instructive time in my early formative startup days, where I created a product that didn't have a market, and so I suppose my subsequent startups, all technology, and their success was rooted in the failure of my very first one, because I now spend an awful lot more time worrying about who my customer is, what problem they have, and how I can solve that problem either more effectively than competing alternatives, if there are indeed any competing alternatives. So off I went. My first formal startup, I suppose, after the failure at 18 was when I was 25. I was a couple of years out of doing my degree. I haven't looked back since. So I've been employing myself effectively, fundamentally, since those days, doing what I don't do.
But starting so young at 18, I mean, that the best thing about that is they talk about, especially in technology space, is it's failing fast, right? So you say it was a failure, but like you said, the principles, the things that you learned from that first one, have helped you refine the latter projects that you were then doing and taking on, right?
Well, I think it's a truism, I know, and most textbooks, business books will tell you this, because you learn more from your mistakes than you do your successes. There's no question that is absolutely true. But there's a couple of things I should tell you. If you were interviewing my mother right now, she'd say I was 40 when I was born. So actually, by the time I got to 18, in fact, I was 58 years of age, in her eyes. Just I was the oldest of 5 kids. I got a bit mature, was always doing things a little earlier than perhaps my age would have suggested. So that was the first thing. And then, as I said, I was really destined to do this, because having built had gone through the process, I really enjoyed this. It is very creative process of bringing something to life, which is effectively what it is you're doing. So then subsequent to that, everything I've done thereafter has been repeating the pattern, but also learning from the mistakes you made. So next time round, I won't do that quite the same. I'll do it a little bit different, or I'll change tack, or I'll never do that again. So by the time I got to number 7, I've become quite practiced at it. And number seven is Higgi Haus. But running through all of that is a customer centricity and a focus on the problem to solve and the customer to serve.
So, like you said, you've gone through 6 startups. You exited, I believe, on the 6th one. Did you sell that company?
I sold several of them. I mean, I sold the last one. Yeah. So chose to exit. Sold to a very large company, and we went from we were about 55 people at that time. Well, this particular business wasn't huge, but it was international in scope. We had a US operation as well, highly specialized niche market we were operating in, and we were bought by what to me seemed like an enormous company, because it had something like 7,000 employees across the globe. Became part of that. That in turn, within 1 year, was swallowed by another company, which meant we now had 70,000 employees, and within 1 year of that was swallowed by what at the time was the world's largest IT services business. So we ended up being 250,000 employees in the space of 24 months. So that was
wow,
an interesting time. What that taught me was I never, ever want to work in a really, really, really big company ever again. Learning again from the mistakes one makes, or the experiences you have. So that's that. So I sold it, did my earn out, and it really was contemplating what I did next that caused me to be where I am now. So I was never going to be spent the balance of my career spent sort of treading the corporate hierarchy and the politics and all of that sort of stuff in a large company.
And that's where it brings us to now. It brings us to your property journey, and spending all that time in the tech space and other startup businesses to then come into property. Why get involved in property when you did?
Accident. You genuinely accidental. So like everyone, like most rather, I should say, also my generation, you own your family home, or you have a property, possibly, one or the odd rental property. I just had my family home. So I was never a property person, other than I've lived in a home and I like the home I lived in. But we'd reached that point where my children, 4 children, they're now 30 is my oldest, 21's the youngest. They'd left home. We had this big lump of a Victorian property in Bristol, and we were thinking, well, what do we do with it? Delith, my wife and I, was like, well, we don't really need a space of this size. So I started to investigate what we would sensibly do with the property we owned, and I depending on your perspective, I made either the mistake or the discovery. I purchased Simon Zucchi's book. You may be familiar with him. Probably Magic.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I started, genuinely with I wonder if this will help me and determine what might be a good option for this particular property we happen to own. And I got, drawn in. I got absolutely, ultimately by the end of the book, utterly captivated, and felt that here was an interesting place where there clearly were there was potential for me to apply my knowledge and my skills. My darling wife at the time said, "Please don't do another startup." By the way, that was. What she said to me. That was her only advice: was don't do another startup. And for those folk who are on listening to the call right now who are entrepreneurs, you'll know this. It's a tough gig. It really is. And sometimes it's as tough for those around you as it is for you. You are absent even when you're present. So my children, who've fortunately grown up reasonably well adjusted and decent young human beings, will from time to time. remind me that there were great chunks of their growing up when I wasn't really there, even if I was there. And that's part of it, right? That's one of the big challenges. So for my wife, it was more, can we do something together, but not do another startup? Now, I took that, by the way, to mean what she really meant was to do another startup where she was involved. She actually meant, no, we make cheese or something. There was some comment after the fact, after I'd actually gone down the path of starting Higgi Haus. So Higgi Haus started as solving a problem. In this case, my problem was out of property. What do I do with it? Read the book, got captivated, got really inspired. And then I, in parallel, started to engage with conversation with my children, and inevitably, banker dad and all that sort of stuff. Questions were coming about where they should live, how they should live, what they should, and it became very obvious to me very quickly that they were struggling to find the right type of accommodation that they wanted at the right price that met their needs, and that struck me as distinctly odd. It was like, well, you hear all these stories, don't you, about 2 million landlords and 4 million rental properties, or whatever the numbers currently are. And you're going, what, you can't really find something that meets your need in and amongst all of that? And the answer was no. So I thought, hang on, so you start scratching, and hear my instinct to my oversized entrepreneurial ears, which are listening for the signals of a problem to solve and a customer to serve, combined with Simon's book, led me to a place where it was, here's something I think I could make a contribution to. And that's fundamentally changing the way this market works. And I never tend to think small, by the way. And delivering something that met the need of the young professional as that need is defined today.
Well, that's interesting. That's what I want to dive into a little bit more is your mindset and that approach, because you've touched on it already, that you look at things from a different perspective, and that's definitely come from your entrepreneurial background and being in different industries. Almost the blue ocean strategy way of thinking. You're taking something from another industry and bringing it to this one, or definitely that way of thinking. And certainly for me, and I know a lot of other people who are involved in property, they don't look at it that way. They look at an individual investment property on its own, look at it from a landlord perspective. Does it bring the returns that I'm looking for? Yes. Is it in the right location? Great, I'll do that one. And then if they look at another one, they look at it completely separate. We're not looking at it necessarily from a business approach, and like you said, the bigger picture. And you touched on them a little bit, but what are some of the questions that you asked yourself, or some of the processes that you went through to find that niche so quickly for you?
Well, I mean, you make a really important point, and I think the whole industry, as I see it and observe it from an outsider's perspective, because I am, it's transactionally centric. So it's not customer centric, and that's the thing that struck me as not odd, because, and by the way, this is clever. It's just I've been used to doing it in another world, where if you didn't think about your customer, your competition, your products, and the markets you serve, you were dead in the water. So by definition, you spent time honing your craft and your skill, and making sure that you always had an offering and a proposition in the market that was going to pass muster. You come into the world of property, and that no one seemed to think that way. But I couldn't think any other way. So it's not some, like I had some revelatory moment where I went, oh my God, this whole industry needs to change. It was, well, this is how I would do it. And it just turned out that in doing it that way, many of the skills that I'd acquired were transferable. And it is also identify that this transactional centricity in the market meant there were opportunities for people who would think a different way. And my way of thinking is, who is my customer? What do they need? Why do they need it? And what alternatives do they have in the market? And how can I do something that's better? That's my way of thinking. I cannot think any other way. So from that, it became clear that there was an opportunity to create an offering that I didn't know at the time was called co-living, by the way, that was much more about the experience. I talk in terms of, people ask me, what's your philosophy when it comes to design, or how you approach these things? And we got, I like my little sayings, my little stories, my little mnemonics to try and make things more explicable. And I'd say it's place, space, face, and feel. So most people think in the world of property, even now, design is, you've got an orange window. or a fluffy cushion or whatever, and you've got a funky bit of art on the wall. Say no, 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 no. It doesn't start there. It starts with the place. Is the property in a location that makes sense for the audience you're seeking to serve, not for the transaction, for the audience you're seeking to serve? In the case of a young professional, there's got to be a transport infrastructure. But actually, more important than that are the bars and the restaurants and the clubs and the things that they want to be associated and near with. Where are they? So place is first, space is second. For us, it's all about how a property feels ultimately, and so it's much. So I'm trying to I think it's much more than just the aesthetic. So the aesthetic is important, but it's much more than that. The space, does the space work? Does the space can the space be reorganized to flow better, to work better for those people who are going to occupy this space? And how is it going to enhance the way they feel about living there? So space and the design of the space is really, really important. And then what I refer to as face, because I like my little mnemonics, my little, and it rhymes nicely, is the aesthetic. How does it look? So how does it look? And then you get on to the final part, which is ultimately where we're destined, which is how does it feel? And feel is in two parts in the way we view things. You would have bought a house or rented a house, and you'd have looked at many alternatives, and you'd have stepped across the threshold of one of them and gone, this is home. You won't know why. You'll have made that determination in 30 seconds. You possibly haven't even gone too far into the property before you know. There's a sort of gut instinct, and it's, in other words, how does it feel? And so what we want to try and do is to think about our audience, think about our customer, and design our spaces so that when they step across that threshold, they feel great. They feel home, safe, secure, comfortable, and meeting their needs as they perceive. So that's one part. And then we went on. We said, okay, also, if we're going to do that, it's going to feel great. Then it's also about the experience. So we want to take it beyond delivery of a room and design our solution, our service, that actually also contributes a little bit to the most important part of all of this, which is we're social animals, and young people want to hang out together with like-minded folk. They want to do things together. They want to have fun together. They want to experience life together. So we, as providers of the space where they do that, can help foster a better experience. And so for me, those four elements of design as we see them are where I started thinking. So I just simply said, okay, so how could this service be better? How could this solution be better? And we came up, we ended up, coming up with Higgi Haus. But as I say, most people will know Higgi Haus because of the design aesthetic. We're real consistent with that. But actually, there's much more to it under the hood. And a really important part, because you touched upon this really earlier on, is we are also transactionally oriented, but only as a and this also has to work financially too. So it's not we do this at any cost. And all of the things that we now do as a business are ultimately driving us towards delivery of what I refer to as superior financial performance. So the reason our rents are 30 to 50% higher than market average, the reason our voids are at 0%, the reason, and we just finished a property in November. COVID brought us in late, unfortunately. Worst time you could possibly wish to be taking a property to market, right? November, for a shared house, 7 rooms. 5 rooms were sold before we even marketed it. The balance that we put in market on the Friday, the other 2 rooms were sold by Tuesday, and all at record rents. So 4 people didn't even see the property before they moved in. So those things only happen if everything else you've done that runs up to that allow the customer to be confident and comfortable that they can make a choice like that. So that's what I want to try and articulate for your audience. It's design is much more than the color palette and the way it looks and feels. It's absolutely everything from beginning to end if you have your customer at the heart of your thinking.
I want to get into that a little bit more, but I just want to take a couple of steps back because, like I said, there'll be people listening to this and we're talking about Higgi Haus and talking about co-living, and they might not necessarily know what that means. And this won't be doing it justice, but just from a very simple perspective, it's shared living. People know it in the very simplest form as the closest thing to a HMO that they would understand, but it's so different because that, like you said, it's the quality, it's the brand, it's everything else that comes with it. It's the fact that it's a home, not just accommodation, really.
Technically it's an HMO. So
Yeah.
so technically that's what it is. We ban the term HMO inside Higgi Haus, and not actually for the reasons most people would assume. It is, unfortunately, HMOs have got a bad reputation in many localities around the country. People are fed up with the muling, the puking, the noise, the mess, and all the things that they associate with those things. For us, it's more to do with the fact that your young professional, your customer, doesn't wake up in the morning and go, "I want to live in an HMO." They don't do that. They don't think like that. So if that's a term that they don't use and don't understand, why on earth would you use that in your articulation or your communication of your product or service or offering? So co-living, which is, as you just quite rightly identified, in essence is a framework for shared social living. That's what it is. Though it's technically an HMO, actually it's not. There are differences, which hopefully I've touched upon on a few of those things. But our view of the world is co-living is but one part, and our mission, our strategy, if you want to think of it in those terms, is what we call through life social living. Because as we started to get under the skin of our product and what we were going to take to market for a young professional, what we concluded was the things that the young professional wants aren't fundamentally different to those of a couple or a small family or someone in middle age who's divorced, or whatever life circumstances you find yourself in, you need somewhere to live. And we felt that this whole notion of shared or social living was important across all life stages. So we sort of redefined slightly our focus. We didn't say we are exclusively focused on young professionals, given life stage, sort of single, just in their first jobs and that sort of stuff. We just said we for now are focused on delivering a product that meets the need of that life stage. But ultimately, we see these things, we see this transcending all life stages, so that you could, for example, have, they do exist, Higgi Haus, well, not Higgi Haus like this doesn't exist, but properties like this exist, where you've got 7, 8, 9, 10 retired couples all living in an environment. And I don't mean like sort of old people's. My parents' business, by the way, was old people's homes. So that's where I originally come from. I grew up above the shop too. So I don't mean like that sort of institutional approach. I'm talking about almost think it like co-living for folk who are 60 plus.
Yeah, like retired apartments.
Like
would you say?
Not even that, but much more focus on the experience, the shared amenities, and what have you. Anyway, so we started to think about all of this, and we said, you know what? Ultimately, for us, this manifests as what we call the Higgi Village. So our ambition is to build a Higgi Village, and the Higgi Village is an urban campus. So it's right smack in the middle of a large city. It's comprised of multiple buildings where each building is designed very specifically around the needs of each life stage, but all connected together with absolutely amazing communal amenities designed to foster intergenerational community. So in other words, you get the old folk mixing with the young folk. In other words, you create this environment that almost creates accidentally reasons for different generations to interact because of the nature of the shared spaces. So although we start talking today about co-living and HMOs and 7 beds, 10 beds, what have you, where we see this going is manifest in the Higgi Village, which is a fairly fundamentally different undertaking, but rooted in the same spot.
Well, like you said, when you think of an idea, Luke, you don't think small, do you? But I like the fact that it can absolutely grow, can't it? It's you're focused around the brand more than focus around what you do as a strategy. And again, that's a different approach, because people in property, and I keep using it as a generalization, but we're almost told to get really good at one strategy. So get really good at co-living and know that inside out. And again, your approach seems more to be know your customer inside out and then deliver whatever strategy it is that they need. And then you can grow, your customer can almost grow with you through life, right? If they know you as a brand as co-living, then they might know you later on in life for the retirement co-living or some mid-range as well, right?
You absolutely bang on, and I think that's the thing I would encourage everyone to do, because just because we do it and that's the way we focus, it doesn't mean to say others go, "Oh, I can't be bothered, I'm going to carry on doing my thing." Ultimately, regardless of what you do, if you're asking someone to give you money in exchange for a service or a product, they are your customer. And if you don't do that well, if you don't do that in a way that suits that customer's needs, at some point you're going to have a problem. So whether the competition is going to sneak up and bite you in the backside, or something's going to occur that causes you to be in a situation where you can no longer compete effectively. So you mentioned the brand word, which to me is like that's church as far as I'm concerned. For us, who we are and what we do and how we do it is fundamentally important, and we've spent time investing in that so that others know that too. So for us, the building of the brand and the focus on the customer and the market segment which we're in is just as important as some of the other things that are critically important in the world of property. And that's really, really deliberate, and I think really important. It's to think about it as a business. So we talk about thinking as a customer, but also thinking about it as a business. And if you're going to think about it as a business, your business needs to exist in an environment where it can compete effectively. You can only compete, in my opinion, long term effectively if you are differentiated. So a reason a lot of folk find themselves in a difficult spot is because their offering is no different to the guy next door. I mean, literally and metaphorically speaking. And you make the difference with the consumer then to choose, because there is no choice. They're both the same. And if things are the same, the only way you can compete is on price. And that's a really dangerous place to be. To give an example, I let one or two folks tell me, I like my simple HMOs and their Magnolia, and they work and they're functional, and I get my rents. I say, well, yeah, but you could be getting rents 30, 40, 50% higher than that. You could also be reducing let's say someone says, I assume a voids of 10%. You'll also be doing 0%. All of these things contribute fundamentally to the financial performance. And that's why it's important, not just because it's a bit more ephemeral and woolly and brands and all that sort of stuff, which is puts some people off. But if you come back to your brand being fundamentally just the essence of who you are and what you do, that's all it is. And be consistent about that, and make sure it's appropriate for the customer you're seeking to serve. And give you a classic example. So we just let rooms. I told you the rooms we let in this property that came to market at the wrong time of the year, but nonetheless we got all the rooms away, and we broke a record for a single room rent in that particular property. By the way, that's in an environment also where there are twice the number of properties on spare room as there were this time last year. And the reason for that is because there are some. This is in Swansea, by the way. I don't know if I mentioned that, but that's one of the areas we choose to invest. And the reason for that is because there's been a lot of student properties are empty. Two reasons: because Swansea is actually catching up a little bit, and there's now some PRS schemes going up that are meaning there's the shift of demand and the way that the demand is delivered. That's one. So you've got an oversupply in the more conventional small SME, and on top of that, you've got COVID has disrupted the market in terms of timing for the students, and so you've got a lot of student properties where people are going, I've got no rent. What do I do? I'll put it on young professionals. I'll go to young professionals. And what do they do? What's the first thing they do? Slash the price. So we sold 12 rooms because we have another property that we had some rooms to sell. We had 12 rooms in 8 weeks, all at record rents for us, our conventional rents, all higher than market. There are still properties on the market which, on the first surface of it, look quite reasonable, that are half our rent. They're not selling. So it comes down to, ultimately, if you truly want to build a business, a property business, then you really need to consider brand. You need to consider your customer. You need to consider these things. They will lead to superior financial performance. That's important. We must never forget that, because that's what makes this whole thing sustainable and allows us to invest and reinvest. But I think the world has moved on and changed even in the last 3, 4, 5 years in the world of property. And for those who sort of woken up to that and see it as an opportunity, I think there are tremendous opportunities over the coming months and years. And in our case, what we're doing is we're buying properties from the folk who've popped out the other end and can't sell their units anymore, They're all in poor shape and underinvested. So great, we're buying them. So thanks, guys. We're able to take it and turn it into something else. No, I'm conscious I'm going round and around the same subject.
No,
It's
because I
important.
think people can hear it multiple ways and only one way sticks sometimes. So I don't think that's a bad idea, and I think it's so important for people to look at it from this approach. It's a very simple example would be if I'm going to go to stay in a bed and breakfast or a Premier Inn, I'm probably likely to stay a Premier Inn only because it's the same everywhere I go. And even if it costs a little bit more, I know what I'm getting. And that's the power of brand from that perspective. But also, I wonder how much is the quality and how much is brand. Because like you said, if you have a higher quality product, you can charge higher rents. But also brand, you can charge higher rents too. And you'll have less voids as well. How much do you think is that the brand, and how much do you reckon that is the quality of the product, or is it absolutely completely intertwined?
No, I think that's a very, very, really important point, and you've effectively encapsulated the challenge, the argument, discussion, debate that Ian and I have between us all the time. So if I'm product guy, right? So I'm out there, I'm front. That's my role. Ian, he manages all our construction. So his worry always is, how much does this cost, Luke? so he's always focused on, can we do this in a different way? Can we do this less expensive? My argument is always no. We've got to be on it, differentiating our offering. We absolutely have to be the best. So the reality, and then sometimes he wins out and we change something, and usually what happens is nothing. Right, we save some money. So I think the reality is somewhere between the two. I really do. We will probably over-engineer. We probably spend a little bit more sometimes than we absolutely need to. But that's paranoia on my part. That's knowledge that where we are now, there are plenty of other people looking at me, looking at Higgi Haus, looking at our properties, and wondering how they can do the same. Well, so I need to mentally be always 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 steps ahead.
Because so you always innovate. You always innovating new features. Yeah,
exactly. And so in that sense, you could say it sort of does eventually become part of the brand, because there's almost an expectation that you will be innovating. You'll have something new for your customer. I mean, I'll give you a classic example. I mean, one we're just implementing in our property now in first property in Swansea, and we call it the Higgi Hub. But we have so our strategy for property is twofold. So co-living on the one hand, so residential investments, effectively repurposing old properties with good bones, but eventually it's refurbishment. And then I suppose we're going to be contributing to a bit of urban regeneration and helping our high streets, because we're buying retail buildings with offices over, and we're converting the offices into studio units and creating small apart hotels, and then Higgi hubs, co-working of the retail. So we're turning the retail into effectively a HMO for desk rental, but very flexible, very funky, consistent brand. By the way, you'd walk into one, you'd know it's Higgi Haus. You walk into a studio, you'll know it's Higgi Haus. You walk into co-living, you'll know they're all part of the same operation, same organization. We started to think about how we could manifest our desire to create more social interaction inside our what we call little Higgies. So a 7-bed, 10-bed, and up to about 20-bed units. And the conclusion we came to was that just creating more social space doesn't do the trick. So what we need to do is make more useful social space. So we created a Higgi Hub. So we've got Higgi Hub for work. So that's our co-working locations. We've actually created a residential Higgi Hub, which we're now going to be putting in all of our properties going forward. And in essence, it is a multi-function social space that comprises 12 rooms in one. And it's designed in such a way that you can convert it from one use to another use in a few minutes. So, for example, it's a cinema, okay? It's a library. It's a digital games room. It is a analog games room, so board games. It's a restaurant. It's a bar. It's a co-working location. It's a gym. It's a yoga studio. It's a meditation studio. It's an art and crafts workspace, and it's a kitchen garden. I think that's 12. But we've designed this space when we've got that into 180 square feet. And the idea then is these hubs sit and exist inside your co-living unit, and are designed so that folk can go and gather and eat a meal. Well, there's a bar, by the way, so we've even got converted to a bar. Play on the PlayStation, play Monopoly, have a game, eat a meal, go work if you're fed up working in your own room. Everyone has a desk, but you can come out and work there. You can hang out. The library, I didn't mention library. There's a library. You could read. You can watch a movie. There's a whole series of things that you can now do and experience that come as a direct result of rethinking how you put your communal space and what your communal space is there to do. So there's an example. So now we've got branded Higgi hubs, residential versions, will be going into all of our co-living properties so that we can truly live up to our desire to create social interaction, social connection, and just a great place to live. That's an example.
Look, and that example is so interesting and fascinating because it spurred a few questions of you've got this multifunctional space that you've got there that's really usable for people. And, again, an old way of thinking might be, well, take the size of that space, 30, 50, 70 square meters, whatever, I don't know. And you think, someone else might think, well, I could have got another 7 rooms in there and I would have made up the price that way, So, but your way is, well, no, we'll put that space in there and make people want to stay here. And you could up the rents on the other rooms that are actually there in the building. It's so many different ways of looking at it, and I can see how people might think. Traditionally, they'd be like, "Oh, that's not a waste of space," but they wouldn't have looked at it that way.
No, I agree, but I think the important bit is I'm not saying this is the only way, by the way, because both of those things are right. It depends on the circumstances and the approach that you've decided to take. I mean, I was the other day I was reading what I was reading, but it was reminding me of there's the Apple strategy. Let's think of it that, which I suppose is what we're trying to do, which is to create something that is so desirable, you want it, it functions brilliantly. That's what we're trying to be, and that's a hard graft because you've got to spend time, money, and effort creating it. And let's think about the Ryanair strategy at the other end. Cheap as chips, but and it's not the greatest experience, but hell, it's cheap. Both of those are perfectly reasonable and strategies that will work for producing valuable returns. The issue is at the middle. So don't be in the middle, right? So if you're going to go and put 19 rooms where we'd put 12, and make it super efficient and really drive out the cost, then do that better than anyone else on the planet, and it'll work. The issue is when you get trapped in that middle ground of you're neither one or the other, and there's too many other people who are just like you.
I completely agree, and that comes back all the way to what you were saying at the start: is know your customer inside out. Because if you know them and know their needs and know their wants, you won't go for the low end. You won't try and cram in all these extra rooms, and you'll certainly try and stay away from being in the middle. Because there's a good argument that like you said, more space personally doesn't necessarily mean that the client's happier. For example, the prices might sound not too dissimilar between a 1-bedroom flat and living in a co-living space, but a lot of people will choose the co-living space, won't they? Because you're not on your own. If lockdown's taught us anything, you don't necessarily want to be on your own, right?
Yes. Well, that's a very good point. I think one of the things that come out of the last 10 months, pushing 12 months, is actually how important social interaction is. And the assumption by many is, oh well, shared living, that can't be good, because of social distancing and all that sort of stuff. Actually, the reverse is now true. What we're finding is that the things that youngsters need and want, they're amplifying the social connection interaction. So there's an increase in demand for shared living in this way. When you would logically think that people would run, go and sit in their own apartments, not having to share any resources. Actually, the reverse is totally true. We are by our nature social animals. And I guess you're right. In the last 10 months, that's been reinforced how important that is to our mental health, our general well-being, and our sense of who we are and what we're about. And co-living, HMOs, equally, are all ways of delivering on that sense of community, sense of social interaction. We choose not to force folk to share bathrooms, of course, because our spaces are at the high end, and everyone has their own their own ensuite bathroom. Not, but it came up in a conversation we were having yesterday. We're not saying that's the only way you should do it, by the way. It depends on who your customer is, the price point, and what you're trying to do. In our case, that's an important part of our product and our proposition. It doesn't, however, necessarily mean you don't you put en suites in everywhere. But one of the things we have witnessed in our demographic is the one thing they're not keen on sharing is the bathroom. Right? So I suppose if anything comes out of the last 10 months for us, it's just affirmation that the route we were on was fine, because it wasn't do this because of COVID. We're doing it anyway, but it helps us and makes our spaces just that little bit more attractive as a result.
No, that makes sense. That makes sense. And Luke, I want to go back and just talk about. Let's go through one of your first projects. I think that's a great way for people to learn and understand, because I know people pick up a lot of lessons from their first project. So if we go back to the conception of Higgi Haus, and you're taking on your first co-living property, I would have thought. Tell us a little bit about that project. Where you found it, what it was, and go from there.
Yeah, and the very first project was actually smaller than we now deem our standards. That was the first thing. It was smaller, and he ended up being 5 beds. It was Article 4, and we chose to go, let's go and take it through the planning system. So we converted it from residential C3. So we went change of use. So we made this as complicated and as lengthy as we possibly could, basically, for a 5-bed unit. However, so in South Wales, which is where we'd chosen to invest, and the whole of the country is Article 4 anyway. So it was like, well, these are the parameters in which we have to play. So why not? So the first thing we did was run headlong into the planning system. That wasn't much fun, and remains not fun now even, but that wasn't much fun. Seemed like obstacles left, right and centre to what it was we wanted to create. So that's the first learning, I suppose. The second was everything cost you an awful lot more than you thought or estimated right from the outset, no matter how careful you are. That was the second thing that became very obvious early on. The third thing that became very obvious was that if you create a good product, people will come. So almost like we did get some negatives. So we learned we'd spent more money than we should have spent, or we thought we were going to spend. So that was a learning. But we did have confirmed once we'd finished that the effort we'd expended, despite the planners, despite everything else, we were on to something, because all rooms let within 5 days, I think it was, for that one. And 80%, we had 80% conversion. In fact, on Montpellier, which is a project we just finished, we have 100% conversion. And what I mean by that is anyone who steps over the threshold to view a room, 100% of them bought a room. So to sell the rooms, we did, in this case, 2 viewings. We had 2 rooms, we had two viewings, but we sold 7 rooms with 3 viewings, right? And all 3 viewings resulted in a sale. So we know with this particular property, the same thing happened. We had an 80% conversion. So we thought, okay, there's something about what we're doing and the product we've created in the market then, and the assumptions we've made that is right. So we got a sort of a curate's egg, right? It was good in parts.
So I assume it was just a normal. Was it a normal terrace building, a semi-detached? Was it in a normal residential area? What was the building?
End of terrace, 4-story, so slightly unusual, and that's what made us attractive to it. So it was a small house, about 1,600 square feet. It had a very large basement, and the basement was at the garden level at the rear. So it wasn't dark and dingy, quite the reverse. So out of the basement, we were able to carve this communal area of kitchen, community area, attach it directly to a lovely garden at the same level, which had a fire pit in it and all sorts of other stuff. And that was the basement layer. And then above that, you had 3 stories of residential. But from the road, it wasn't, it looked like a 2-story house. It's just that it was slightly odd. The important thing about its location as well, and this I've maintained throughout, it was also in a location where the locals said, "You're mad." That's not got a great reputation, that area, for a whole host of reasons. We came at it from a different perspective. We went, I'm looking at this with fresh eyes, not some historic, it was a dodgy area at one point or whatever. I'm looking at this it is 10 minutes that way to Starbucks in the city centre. It's 7 minutes that way to the funkiest bars and restaurants in the uplands. It is 200 meters in that direction across that down that road to transportation in and out of the city centre. It is a 12-minute walk to the mainline train station. You are a 15-minute walk from the beach. I'm going, what's not to like about this? And so we ignored the sort of historic naysaying and said, this is a great property in a great location. And actually, when we did our validation, there were no issues with safety or anything like that in the area. It's just the locals' perception of it was rooted in what it was 10 years ago. And the woman from whom we bought it, she said, "No, yes, many years ago it was a little dodgy around here, but no, it's a lovely area. I've got lovely neighbours, and we've enjoyed living here." So that was the important thing. We said you can find the marginal spaces in the urban, slightly more gritty edge of centres, and that's where you get your value from. So this was a classic example of that.
That spurred a really important thought in my mind, that the location of that, even though it's not renowned traditionally for being the best place, let's say, the way you've looked at it in terms of the things that can't change, right? So then the town's not going to move the train station. You know, they're unlikely to be able to move things like that. You can't move the beach. You can't move the shops. Are normally these areas, they're not going to change, right? What can change is the gentrification of the area. That's the over time. That's the thing that's more likely to change than anything else there. And I think that's a fantastic point for people listening, that don't just write off those areas just because traditionally they're not known as a great location. Does it have everything that you need? And if you changed one thing, i.e. the types of people that traditionally were there, would it be a good location? That's not a bad way to look at things, is it?
It is. It's absolutely bang on. And it's also, don't look at it through your eyes. You know, if I looked at that from would I personally have chosen to buy a house for myself to live in that particular road? No, the answer is no. But that didn't make it the wrong or the right thing to do. I'm not buying for me. I'm buying for my customer. And for my customer, the area was perfectly safe. It was connected to all the things they were interested in, and we created a lovely product for them. And the important thing, I think, with rental versus purchase, and why sometimes folk get the two things a little confused, is the decisions people will make when occupying a space that they rent is very different to the decisions they'll make from occupying a space that they're going to purchase. And so, you know, they can, yeah, well, if I don't like it, I'll be gone in 6 months' time, or I'm moving on in 12 months anyway. So you've got a little bit more latitude, a little bit more flexibility. I'm not, by the way, advocating that you immediately go and buy stuff in, Stabsville, Northamptonshire, because safety is critical and people have to feel safe. But I'm talking about the slightly edgier, the slightly rougher, slightly less tidy areas, particularly if they're adjacent to a more affluent area, are great places for us. So in the end, all of the investments that we've made in Swansea are in this area now, all the properties, because the first one worked. So come back to lessons. The first one worked, and that gave us the confidence. Then we acquired another, and now we're in the process of actually our latest project there is subject to planning. We hope to get plans of a 21-bed hotel that we're in the anticipating converting into a 21-bed, 21-bath co-living unit, right smack in the middle of the city.
And I assume, like, people talk about ceiling prices. I assume you're breaking through ceiling prices with the units that you're creating, based on commercial valuations, or even based on just I guess commercial valuations, would it be?
It is, and an important part, most folks will know Higgi Haus for the look, the feel, the aesthetics, the brand, and that sort of stuff. Actually, what's really, really important to us is our finance strategy, our financial strategy. Our financial strategy, the reason we only do 7 beds and up is because I'm confident then I'm going to secure valuations based upon my rent, and my rents are high, therefore my values are higher. That means I can spend more in on the unit. That's how and where we've taken it. So to give you an example, that very first property we paid 6,500 to be exact. And when we were done, it was valued at 330. Now we spent 120 on it, so we spent too much money actually in reality on it. But
and just to give people, to give people an idea of how long ago that was. Just
that's 3 years. That's 3 years.
3 years.
Yeah, it's only 3 years. The next one we paid 250,000 for. That we got planning for, but this is an option, which is a little bit unusual in resident. You're doing options with residential occupiers. We also did it subject to planning. We got planning. We turned that into a 10-bed unit that valued up at 650,000. The original asking price for the building as a residential property was 335. By the way, we bought it for 250. The next building we paid 140 for, and that's valued up at 470. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Now,
so it's a combination of obviously buying at a good price, but also adding value through either extension or conversion into these co-living units.
Yes, it's also about managing the process. So we are, we're control freaks, I suppose. We want to make sure that the outcome is what we projected the outcome to be. And if you think about it from financials, you've got your purchase prices are known, and all the costs associated with it. You've got your construction transformation. Is not absolutely unknown, but it's getting better, in terms of our ability to estimate what a building's going to cost. And then, of course, you've got how it values up, and you need to manage each of those phases. So managing the purchase is actually easy. Once you've negotiated the deal, that's fairly straightforward. Irritating and full of obvious opportunities to reduce bureaucracy and all that sort of stuff. And everyone complains about solicitors and all that sort of stuff. But at the end of the day, it's a process. You get it done. The next bit is harder to manage, especially with the back to brick stuff we're doing, the scale of our refurbishments. But we've got that pretty much nailed down, so we're now comfortable with that. The piece that can then really damage your model or otherwise is getting the right valuation. If you allow the lender to just randomly select some panel member who pitches up because they've got some contract and then that's the valuation they give you, that's not acceptable to us. So what we do is we even manage the process to the point where we're very careful about the lenders we choose, because we know which valuers they're going to use, and we know the valuers, and we know the valuers know our product and understand our product in the marketplace. So we're always trying to mitigate risk. And at the end of the day, if it comes out and consistent with the deal stacking sheet that you created right at the beginning, we're all happy. Everyone's happy.
And that's interesting.
That's how we do it.
You keep an eye on every aspect of the process, and that's how you are going to mitigate your risk from that perspective. Luke, we're going to run out of time soon. I've got a last couple of questions, and this brings me on to the franchise model that you guys are looking to create moving forward, which is something you've seen, but you haven't really seen in the property investing world. Again, it seems like somewhat of an innovative approach. Can you tell us a little bit more about that franchise strategy?
Yeah, it exists, by the way. So we've now have our first cohort of franchisees already lined up and ready to go. It was always the intent to contemplate how we could take intellectual property and derive value from that. And bear in mind, all my businesses before were all technology businesses. So largely the only asset you had was an intellectual asset, an idea or software code. And so intellectual property and driving value from that was always sort of a thing, right? We knew how to do something with that. So in this case, when we started out, we said, if we can build a brand and we do want to build a business at scale, because the world of property relies so much on capital and is very capital intensive, we're going to need to work with others to do that. If we want to make Higgi Haus achieve our 1,000-room target, which we've since increased, but 1,000 rooms at the time, we're going to do that not all on our own. We're going to do that in partnership with others. How are we going to do that? What we're going to do is prove the model works, build this compelling and powerful brand, and then find other entrepreneurs who have some capital to invest who want to build their own portfolio of Higgi Houses. And that was always part of the thinking, but just never manifest. Through lockdown, it became obvious that there was, when we did a bit of thinking, we thought, maybe now is the time. We've had a lot of people who asked us whether they could do joint ventures with us or invest with us or how could we work together. And we've just effectively transformed all that into now a program where you can work with me and my team, and you can build your own portfolio of Higgi Houses as a franchisee in UK, but even technically it could be anywhere. And been really delighted with the response. We decided that we would only focus on a half a dozen or so franchisees in the first instance. Again, I want to get it right. I don't want to be overstretched. I want to prove, fundamentally that it works. But equally, I want to give the personal time and attention that will allow these, my fellow entrepreneurs, my entrepreneur partners, I'll be helping them build their businesses, basically. So the assumption then is once we've gone down the path and those are all off and running, then we'll open it up to a wider audience and probably do another half a dozen more. The goal, though, is to get to a point where we can comfortably achieve our 1,000+ room objective in Higgi houses across the country, but through working in collaboration with others. So that's what I'm pleased to report. When you and I originally spoke about doing this, it was still in its relative infancy. Now we're signing people up. People want to do this, and we're choosing partners to work with right now. So equally though, if there are any of your listeners who are out there going, quite like the idea of working in collaboration and having my own Higgi houses and working with Luke and his team, by all means get in touch. This is a long game. The first half a dozen will get going. 6 months' time, we'll be looking to add another half a dozen or so. Could be one of your listeners.
Absolutely, and people, might understand how HMOs work or might want to get into that, but didn't even conceive the idea of thinking bigger and being part of someone else's business and tapping into what they've built. Really, if someone's done this before you, made a playbook, then it's and this is the kind of thing you wanted to get involved in anyway, then by all means, I definitely agree to reach out and touch base with Luke. We'll provide his details at the end of this sit down. Luke, last question for me. I like to ask guests about successful behaviors and habits that they have, their weekly and daily routines. Do you have any particular habits that help set you up to win in the week at all?
Yeah, stay curious. Keep asking the question, why does that work? Why does that not work? What is that? Just stay curious. Keep your eyes and ears open and be curious. You'd be amazed at how many opportunities present themselves when others just simply aren't looking.
No, I think that's great bit of advice. And I forgot what that process or that saying is, when you ask why 3 times or something like that, and you get to the real reason why, what the problem is, the real root of the problem. Is it 3 times or 5 times? I can't remember.
Who knows? But
just the more you ask, the better, right?
Yeah. Just keep asking why, and then why not? Yeah.
Absolutely, Luke. No, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on with us today, to hear about your vision and the exciting progress of Higgi Haus. And if there's anything I know our listeners can absolutely take away, it is to look at property from different approaches, to think outside the box and consider what has someone missed when it comes to this investment opportunity. It's true what they say, that the best deals are not necessarily found. They are absolutely created. And Luke, as mentioned, if people want to find you and learn more about you, where can they go?
Yeah, I've got an unusual name, Luke Spikes, so easy to find. We're all over social media, so you can either find Higgi Haus or you can find me. You find me on LinkedIn, of course. By all means, connect with LinkedIn. Facebook, I think we just bumped up against our limit, 5,000 or whatever it is. So don't do that just for a minute whilst we figure that one out. Instagram, and you'll find us. We're very easy to find. Or just go to higgihaus.com and send us an email, and I'll get back to you. That's probably the easiest way to do it.
Brilliant. Luke, I've thoroughly enjoyed this. I know we'll be looking forward to catching up again. I had so many more questions that we just weren't going to get through, but hopefully we get to do it again sometime soon.
That'll be delighted. Cheers, Raj. Really appreciate that. Thank you very much, friend.